This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest, makers of the mythical series Analog Interconnects. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
2 years ago, I made my first video about a $1,000 kick-ass hi-fi system, so loudspeakers, right? And then we did the same again this year. The problem with loudspeakers, as we have recently highlighted, is the room. Now, one thing or one different way of listening that removes the room is headphones. So I got to thinking, wouldn't it be a good idea to talk about a $500, that's the target here, $500 kick-ass headphone system. But if you're thinking, well, I only listen to speakers, headphones aren't for me, I suggest you stick around because the finding we'll get to at the end might surprise you. Now what follows isn't the best headphone system at 500 bucks. It's just some of the best that I've heard. And remember, we're shooting for around, if we can get there, 500. Generally, I'm going to talk about US dollars today. And we can't talk about a $500 headphone system without really acknowledging some of the, but not necessarily some of the best Bluetooth headphones on the market. These are from Sony. They are the WH-1000XM5. This is a fantastic Bluetooth headphone, sells for about $400 US, I believe. But yeah, that's something worth considering. This is also a benchmark that we'll come back to later in the video. But if we don't want to have to rely on Bluetooth for our headphone connection, or we don't need to take our headphone listening out in the street, then we can open up the range of possibilities to us. So that means generally separate, so a separate DAC and headphone amp and separate wired headphones. And we'll start with these Sennheiser. Well, actually made it in conjunction with Massdrop, who are now Drop. This is a pair of HD6XX, which for all intents and purposes are basically a sort of rebranded version of the HD650. This is an open back headphone. There's a dynamic driver here. This is an over-ear headphone. And it sells, well actually it's quite interesting because when I bought these, they were $200 US. But I think recently the price has been hiked to $280 US. Now this is a fairly light headphone to wear, supremely comfortable. Although the clamping force out of the box can be a little bit robust, it does ease over time. And in terms of sound quality, the HD6XX, they don't have the best head staging in the world. It's kind of a bit of a sort of central sort of mush here. And it doesn't really go too far to the left and too far to the right. But what we do get, I mean, what these are really known for and what I really love them for is just this exceptional talent with vocals and mid-range. They can be a bit overly sort of smooth or dark. I'm never quite sure which one it is actually. Sometimes I call it smooth, sometimes I call it dark up top. And the bass isn't the most extended in the world. And these perhaps lack the last ounce of resolution or detail that we get from, you know, much more expensive headphones. But that sort of smoother top end, the sort of slightly darker tonality, the exceptional vocal, well, I won't call it pop, but like clarity, vocal clarity, and just how comfortable these are means that we can listen to the music through the HD6XX for a very, very long time without getting tired or worn out by the sound or having these headphones on our head. I can't think of another headphone that sounds like these. They're just fantastic. And I think that's why the HD650 that preceded these had been a sort of a benchmark in the sort of more affordable price bracket for many, many years. And I think this sort of continues that legacy, even though you can now get the, is it the HD660? And there's other, I think there's another variant somewhere as well, the 600. Now for our DAC/headphone amplifier, we need something that really kind of slices through that sort of smoother, darker sound of the HD6XX. I opted for something pretty cheap actually, because we're trying to keep this at under 500 bucks, right? So the headphones are 280, so we've only really got 220 to play with. So I went for something from everybody's favorite, Topping. Now this is the DX3 Pro Plus. Now you must get the Plus version because it has basically more output power. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the thing is, this is a $200 piece, right? And it looks and feels pretty cheap. I mean, it's kind of, it's just a bit, it's a bit tacky. And the sockets, you can feel the circuit board moving there. The volume control, the knob feel here, not very satisfactory in my book, but I guess all of it is price appropriate, especially when we consider the feature set here, because we've got an ESS based DAC circuit that does high res out of the wazoo if that's what you're into. It has a Bluetooth input. On the back we've got USB, Toslink, we've got 2 coaxial inputs feeding that DAC, and then we've got an analog output so we can use this as a sort of little preamplifier if we wanted to. So the feature set here is pretty solid. And also we get a fair amount of, firstly, output power into our headphones, even though it's from a smaller 3.5mm socket. So we get enough power to juice our 300 ohm Sennheiser headphone, because the Sennheiser HD6XX are not the easiest headphone to drive. We need a bit of grunt behind them. But not only does this Topping give us the power, but it also gives us a higher gain setting. So we have 2 gain settings here, a low gain and a high gain. We need the high gain to get the listening level that I personally enjoy from a headphone. So from the Sennheiser HD6XX. And we mustn't confuse power with gain. I've done this in the past. I've mixed the two up. They are very separate. Gain is like what kind of takes things loud enough for us, but power is really what sort of provides the fullness in a headphone, because if you underpower these Sennheiser, they can sound pretty tepid. But with this Topping, that's not the case. This is not the best amp in the world, not by a long stretch, but it still takes us to, I think, what I would call a satisfactory level in terms of getting fullness from our Sennheiser headphone than we get from, well, we can't even run it from a phone. We don't have the gain on a phone, and we definitely don't have the power to make them sound full enough. But I think the Topping's killer feature for me is its remote control, or rather the remote control ability exists. This is where we change the gain. We can also change volume on here. I think we can change DAC filter. DAC filters don't really do too much the sound in my book, but the gain really does. But I love this because it means I can sit on my couch here and have the Topping all the way behind me on the white Kallax unit underneath the TV. And then I can just sit here with this and my phone, choose music with this, control the volume with this. And I don't need to really get hands-on with the Topping, which is probably a good thing because, as I've said before, it feels a little bit cheap. Whereas the remote is kind of standard for this price point. One more thing about this Topping, this little aerial, that indicates a Bluetooth input. It's not Wi-Fi, it's Bluetooth. And I think the codecs in here are LDAC. There's a few aptX codecs, and there is AAC, among others. So all the bases are covered. But I did not use this as a Bluetooth DAC/headphone amp. Well, not initially anyway. What I did is I went for, to feed this over Toslink, I went for something I've spoken a lot about on this channel, the Wiim Mini network streamer. So you can see here that this has a Toslink output, and I fed that into the Toslink input on the topping DAC. Now this does Tidal Connect, Spotify Connect, and Apple AirPlay, which I mainly used for Roon. But if you don't want to use the Wiim Mini, you could just as easily feed the topping DAC over USB with a Raspberry Pi, if you can get one. Before we go any further, I just want to pause for I think a killer music recommendation for headphone listeners. And this is electronic music. It's by a chap called Max Cooper, who makes very sort of tasteful electronic music. But this one is a binaural recording. If you don't know what a binaural recording is, I'll put a link in the description box below for you. But this is 3D Reworks #1. This is like 4 tracks that you can just hear sounds whizzing around left to right. It's kind of like a 3D headphone listening experience. So I thoroughly recommend this. Just as I guess this is a lazy audiophile thing to say, isn't it? But I thoroughly recommend these headphones with this DAC amp. This is a fantastic sounding combination. And I guess this is our first very spicy finding, is that this headphone with this DAC/headphone amp absolutely, and it does actually, destroy the sound of our $1,000 kick-ass hi-fi system. So the Rotel amplifier, the Dali speakers, and in the case of when I've made that video, the topping DAC. But you could probably use any DAC and still get a fairly good result, because our headphone system gives us a full range sound. We get proper low bass that we don't get from our $1,000 hi-fi system. And I think also that the mid-range on the headphone system just pops a little bit more. I mean, the headphone system is not perfect, there are shortcomings, but one of the shortcomings is not the room. We don't have to factor the room in as we do with our $1,000 hi-fi system. So we spend half the money, and I think we get sort of like 2 or 3 times the results that we would otherwise get from spending that sort of same money in the hi-fi space. I mean, I don't think I could even put together a decent sounding loudspeaker system for $500, but with headphones, it's generally pretty easy. So this headphone system gives us a taste of like what's possible, a taste of high-end headphone listening, right? But like ice cream, right? That taste can come in different flavors. You see, I was going to stop this video here, but I just kept going, because I had some other, one thing I tend to, I'm a real sucker for, is I like buying very affordable head-fi gear. I don't talk about it a lot on this channel, which is why I'm making this video today, right? So I tend to kind of read about or hear about, or somebody tells me, oh John, you've got to hear these headphones, these earphones. And somebody was raving to me about these. And this is a headphone from Beyerdynamic. It's called the DT990 Pro. This is a 250 ohm edition. I think these are a little bit more comfortable actually than the Sennheiser, believe it or not. Although the padding here, I wish it was a little bit better, because one thing that these give me that the Sennheiser don't is a sort of a bit of discomfort right on the top of the head after an hour or so. This, I think, is going to be a very divisive sounding headphone, far more than the Sennheiser. The Sennheiser is sort of an everyman headphone. This is really not. By contrast to the HD6XX, this sounds, well, there's no sort of there's no way of sort of beating around the bush here. This sounds brighter. It definitely has more zing in the treble, but some people like that. They like that sort of, I guess it's more of an illusion of detail in many cases, but they like that extra zip and zing up top. I think the bass is a little bit more extended from these than the Sennheiser, although the mid-range here is not as good as the Sennheiser. It's just not. But I would say that this is possibly, for the right listener, more of an all-rounder. But the real kicker is that these sell for, I think they're available for about $150. You might better get them a bit cheaper. So I know I did. I mean, basically these are half the price of the Sennheiser. So like $140 US is half the price, and that's what I think I bought these for. I do have a bit of a niggle here. Like on the Sennheiser, we have, well, I can show you, you can see there's two cables connected there, one to each ear cup, but those are detachable. They're 2-pin and they're detachable. But on our Beyerdynamic, we have one point of connection, which I really like, so just a cable on the left-hand side, but you can't remove this. So some people might call the Beyerdynamic DT 990 Pro 250 ohm edition, it's a real mouthful, isn't it? A lot to remember. Some people might call these analytical, and I would certainly agree with that. When I'm editing podcasts or videos, I reach for these, not the Sennheiser, because I want to hear, I guess I want to hear the space in the sound, and this gives me a better look at that. This is like the Sennheiser. This is an open back headphone, dynamic driver, over ear. The impedance is also quite high, 250 ohm. There is a lower ohm version. Don't ask me about the differences in sound quality between this one and the lower ohm one. I don't know. But I obviously did use these headphones with the topping DAC amp. I wouldn't say that this is quite as good a match as it is with the Sennheiser, because this is, the thing is about this topping is that it can sound also a little bit analytical, a bit thin and a bit dry at times. I'm being fussy from the point of view of somebody who's listened to some very expensive gear. That's the way I'm looking at this. I mean, obviously the other way to look at this is like, this is an outstanding piece of hardware for the money in terms of the sound quality, which it is. But if we look at it from a high end, or sort of in the context of all that's available, yeah, bit thin, bit analytical, and that doesn't play as neat counterbalance to the Beyerdynamics as it does to the Sennheisers, which I think is really interesting. I did try these with my phone, with an iPhone, with the Apple sort of dongle that converts lightning to 3.5mm. There isn't enough gain, but also these sound brighter when there isn't enough power on tap. So if you're somebody who is thinking that these might be too bright for you, or you're reading about them and somebody says they're really crazy bright, you need to know how they amplified this headphone, because that really matters. Because even though the topping can be a bit on the sort of lean side, it's not underpowered. So with these, even though I say they are brighter or more lively in the top than the Sennheiser, I wouldn't call them sort of unbearably bright, as I think some people have. The amplification matters with these. And I would say more so than the Sennheiser, because the Sennheiser just sound a bit weak when you underpower them. These become, yeah, unpleasant when you underpower them. And I suspect, and I don't know this, but this is me sort of postulating, that I think if I was going to keep these long term, I'm actually going to give these away on my Patreon in a few weeks, but if I were keeping them long term, I would get a tubed based headphone amplifier, a bit like the Shit-Valley 2 or the newer Shit-Valley 2++, and maybe therefore the matching Shit Modi 3 DAC. So I've got a Shit stack. That's probably what I would do with these long term. But again, that's just me guessing a little bit. But I just think that if the Valley is a sort of a slightly fatter, warmer sound, I think that would be a great fit for these headphones. Now, if right now you're thinking, there is no way, John, that I can entertain an open back headphone because I have people around me when I'm at home, or I have people around me when I'm at the office, fair enough. And you might even think, well, okay, if I've got the Sennheiser and the Wiim and the topping, that takes us over $500. So yeah, that's why I think really the Beyerdynamic really come into their own, because they keep us below $500. However, there is another option that satisfies both of those sort of minor complaints. And that is this headphone from AKG. This is called the K371. This is a closed back headphone, dynamic driver, It is circumaural, so it kind of goes around the ear like the other two. And I gotta say, I don't love the look of this headphone. I really don't. It looks a bit, I don't know, I just call it special. And the mechanism here, I'm not sure I would trust that for too long. They do fold up actually. I mean, there's a detachable mini XLR cable here. And then what you can do, you can sort of fold these up. You can fold these up in here, which you can't do with the other two. So that's kind of pretty neat, isn't it? You can kind of get them into a ball like that. That would fit into a large coat pocket. The other two, no way, because you can't fold them. Not even the Sony Bluetooth headphones do this anymore, do they? Because Sony took that away. Naughty Sony. But these are obviously a wired headphone, closed back. And I think in some ways, actually in many ways, I think these sound a bit better than the other two that I've shown, the other two wired headphones, the Sennheiser and the Beyers. Before we get to sound quality, I do want to talk about a couple of things here. One good, one bad. The price on these, amazing. So I think the normal retail is about $150 US or 160. But right now they're like $109 direct from AKG. 109, amazing. The niggle is that this cable is pretty microphonic. So you tap this and you can hear it in the ear cup. So I don't love that about them, but swings and roundabouts, right? And one of the key selling points of these AKG K371 is that they have been voiced according to the Harman target curve. Now I'll put a link in the description box below that explains that in more detail. But basically it's where Harman has invited people to listen to a whole bunch of headphones with different frequency responses and found what they think is the frequency response that most people prefer. So that basically Harman have voiced these headphones according to that frequency response. So they think that most people will prefer the sound of these over other headphones. Not everybody, but most people, right? This headphone sounds more balanced than the Sennheiser or the Beyerdynamic. What do I mean by balance? Well, just that sort of nothing sort of sticks out or nothing sort of falls off. Although I would say I think the sub bass on these is a little bit too strong at times, but everything else, like from the bass all the way through the mid-range up into the treble, it all seems to be very even. Nothing seems to kind of dip too hard, I don't think. Nothing seems to be elevated too much, I don't think. So this to me is a very, I guess we'd call it a very agreeable headphone. Like it just sounds good with a whole range of music, and there isn't any sort of situation where I go, oh, that's too bright, or oh, that's too bassy, apart from the sub bass, or oh, I think the mid-range is a little bit sucked out there. No, don't feel that way at all about these. So they're not quite as zippy and zingy in the top as the Beyerdynamics. They're not quite as dark and smooth in the top as the Sennheisers. They don't have the sort of mid-range magic of the Sennheisers. They don't have, I guess I didn't really talk too much about the head staging with the Beyerdynamics, but I think the head staging with the Beyers is a bit wider than the Sennheiser, but I think these are equally as good. I think the head staging here is wider than the Sennheiser, not by a large amount, but enough to notice, enough to sort of remark upon, and given that these sell for like under almost a third of the price, right? You kind of go, wow, this is a fantastic value for money. But please know that when you're trying these for the first time, they won't wow you instantly as much as the Sennheiser or the Beyerdynamic. This is a much more of a, what we might call a slow burn headphone that sort of works its magic slowly over a number of days or weeks. And I also think the AKG is the best of the three in communicating music's color, its tone and its timbre. But I think the best thing about this headphone is its impedance. It's 32 ohms. That means it's essentially phone friendly. So because it's closed back, I've taken this out into the street with my iPhone 13 mini and the little white Apple dongle that sells for $10 essentially. And happy days, right? I just think it sounds wonderful. But equally, I think it sounds a little bit better when I get my Android phone and I get the Zorloo Ztella dongle DAC. It just sounds a bit more natural with that. But then if I step it up again to the iFi Go Blue Bluetooth DAC, right? So if I connect this end, the 3.5mm jack, to the Go Blue, What I have there is essentially a wired connection to a Bluetooth DAC that I put in my pocket. So it's kind of like a Bluetooth headphone. And these, with the iFi, to me, yeah, they really do sound a lot better than the Sony WH-1000XM5. And that is what I call a very spicy finding. So I'll be giving away the Sennheiser and the Beyerdynamic on my Patreon in a couple of weeks. I'm going to keep the AKG because I like them that much. But all of these setups, so basically these three headphones with this topping DX3 Pro Plus, what a mouthful, DAC/headphone amp, all of them are, yeah, they really are a very good taste of high-end headphone listening, because this is where diminishing marginal returns really start in the headphone world. They start with these kinds of headphones. You know, headphones that sell for between $100 and $300 US, paired with a DAC amp that sells for a couple of $100. That's where diminishing returns starts. It's pretty low price-wise in my book. And these three headphone setups are also where we get a sound for under $500 that I think bests the sound of multi-$1,000 loudspeaker systems playing in an untreated room. I know there are degrees of untreated room, but generally speaking, a few $100 spent on a head-fi system will best a few thousand spent on a loudspeaker system. Yeah, that's a bold thing to say, but I really do believe this to be true in my experience. And this is why I think loudspeaker people should really be paying attention to this kind of video. Because when you listen to headphones, you get a sense of what music should sound like without the interference of the room. Now, this is especially true in the low end, because one thing the room is really good at is messing up the bass of your loudspeakers. So headphones allow you to hear what the bass kind of would sound like if you've got a properly treated room for the bass. And as we saw recently, room's reverb can really mess up the mid-range and the treble. Right? Headphones allow us to hear music without that reverberation interference, without reverb sort of sitting between us and our loudspeakers. So what I'm saying is that even if you're a staunch loudspeaker listener, I think spending a few $100 like this on a very affordable head-fi system will really open your eyes to just how good your loudspeakers are or aren't. So yeah, that was quite a lot to take in, right? I covered a lot of ground in this video, I covered a lot of gear. But there's also way more gear out there that I didn't cover. And remember, if it's not in the video, I've got no idea about it. This video is focused very much and exclusively on the gear featured in this video. So if you can live with that, please give us a like down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio, that also factors in headphones, because I think they're really important even to loudspeaker listeners. It also factors in affordable headphone listening, which really is probably one of the best bangs for buck out there in all of audio land. I really do think this. So if you dig that, then please consider subscribing to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.